Midnight Regulations 101. This is a clear, accessible look at the last minute rules federal agencies push out in the final months of an administration. In this episode, we're going to break down why they happen, how they're reviewed, and what incoming administrations can and can't do about them. Welcome to the Stuff You Should Think About podcast, where I answer everyday questions about phenomena and objects. I'm G. How's it going? Well, I hope your day is going the way you want it to go. Mine is pretty good, pretty steady. And today I want to talk about something that sounds kind of dramatic, honestly, but really is just a government timing thing. We're talking about midnight regulations. If you ever heard that phrase and thought, oh, what is that? Some secret rule signed at 11:59 with a spooky lamp on the desk? Not really. Midnight regulations are general rules that get pushed through near the end of a president's term, especially during that transition window after the election and before the next administration fully takes over. So the key idea is not that they happen literally at midnight. It's more that they're late-term regulations, end of term, last stretch. The outgoing administration is still in charge, still has legal authority, and agencies under that administration may move quickly to finish rules they care about before leadership changes. And that part matters because once an election happens, everybody already starts thinking ahead. New priorities, new appointees, new policy direction, all that kind of stuff. But until the new administration actually takes office, the old one is still the old one. It still runs the executive branch. Federal agencies can still act. They can still complete work that's been in progress. Sometimes that means tying up loose ends. Sometimes it means trying to lock in a policy approach before the next team comes in and maybe wants something totally different. A regulation, in plain English, is basically an official rule made by a federal agency to carry out a law. Congress passes laws. Agencies often fill in the details. So if a law says protect workplace safety or regulate pollution or set standards for some product, the agency usually writes the more specific rule about how that works in practice. Midnight regulations are just those rules when they're finished in that end of term period. That's it. The phrase can sound loaded, and sometimes people use it that way. But the basic definition is actually pretty simple. Now, why do agencies move fast at that point? A few reasons. One is simple timing. Some rules have already been in the pipeline for months, sometimes longer, and agencies are trying to get them across the finish line. Another is political reality. If agency leaders know a new administration may pause, rewrite, or drop a rule, there's an obvious incentive to finish it while they still can. That part is not mysterious. People try to finish the work they believe in before somebody else arranges the whole desk. So when you hear midnight regulations, think end of a presidential term, ongoing administration, agencies still using the authority they legally have, and a push to finalize rules before power shifts. That's the foundation. Once you get that, the rest of it makes a lot more sense. Okay, so how does this actually happen? Because sometimes government talk make it sound like a rule just appears out of thin air. And that's not usually how it goes. There's a process. A federal agency starts by drafting a regulation. That means it writes a rule language, explains what the rule is supposed to do, and usually builds a justification for it. The agency may be responding to a law passed by Congress, a court's decision, an internal policy goal, or some practical problem it's been told to address. Then there is review. Now, the exact path can vary. And I don't want to overcomplicate this thing because I can hear myself starting to do that. But broadly, agencies don't just freestyle and hit publish. Proposed or final rules often go through internal checks, legal review, and coordination. People look at whether the agency has authority, whether the rule is written clearly enough, whether required procedures were followed, and whether the reasoning is on the record. After that, rules are published in the Federal Register. That's basically the official daily publication for federal government rules, notices, and similar actions. If you want to know where a lot of this becomes public in a formal way, that's one big place. It's like the government's running logbook for this stuff. A lot of rules are first published as proposed rules. That means the agency is saying, here's what we're thinking, here's the text, here's why, and people can respond. That response period is often called notice and comment. The public, businesses, advocacy groups, experts, and other interested people can submit comments. Then the agency reviews those comments and may revise the rule before issuing a final version. And this is where timing starts to matter a lot at the end of an administration. If a rule is still in draft form too late in the calendar, it may not get through review in time. If it's still out for comment, same problem. If legal review takes longer than expected, that can slow everything down. So agencies that want a rule finished before a new administration arrives may be racing the clock. Not because the process disappears, but because the window is closing. Some rules do make it to the final stage before the handoff. Those are the ones people usually focus on. But even then, final does not always mean untouchable forever. A new administration may try to delay the effective date, revisit the rule, revise it through a new rulemaking process, or support repeal if the law allows that path. Some rules may also face court challenges, so there are layers here. And then there are rules that never quite make it. They may be proposed but not finalized, or finalized but still vulnerable, or published so late that the next administration immediately takes a hard look at them. So when people talk about midnight regulations, they're often talking about a rush to finish, but the finish line is not always the final finish line. If that makes sense. Sometimes it's more like getting the baton in the next lane and hoping it holds. So why should anybody care about this? That's a fair question. Because on the surface, it can sound like inside baseball government procedure. And I get it. But regulations shape real life. They can affect workers, consumers, businesses, and regulations that have to enforce them. They can change what has to be reported, what standards have to be met, what protections exist, what costs show up, and how rules are interpreted for years after the administration that wrote them is gone. That means midnight regulations can matter a lot, even if most people never use that phrase in normal conversation. An end of term rule can lock in a policy choice or at least make it harder to quickly reverse course. And sometimes that's exactly the point. The outgoing administration may believe it's finishing important work and creating continuity. From that view, the rule isn't some sneaky thing, it's the last stage of governing while it still has power to govern. But the concern on the other side is also pretty straightforward. When agencies are hurrying, people worry the rules may be less transparent, less carefully developed, or less durable. Durable just meaning likely to stick. If a rule is rushed, it may be easier to challenge, easier to revise later, or just weaker because the record behind it isn't as solid as it could have been. And I think that's where the tension really lives. Government needs continuity. Administrations don't just stop being administrations because an election happened. There's still a job to do. Agencies still have ongoing work, legal duties, and policy agendas. At the same time, a transfer of power is supposed to reflect political change. So when one team is on its way out and still making big regulatory decisions, some people see responsible follow through, and some people see a last minute attempt to cement priorities before voters' choices are fully reflected in policy. You know, both of these concerns can exist at the same time. That's kind of the thing. Midnight regulations are not automatically bad. They're also not automatically good. The label tells you when the rule is happening, not whether the rule itself makes sense. So the basic takeaway is this. Midnight regulations are a product of how power shifts at the end of an administration. Agencies still have authority. They may move quickly, and the rules they finish can have effects that last well beyond Inauguration Day. Whether that's seen as necessary continuity or as rushed policymaking, usually depends on the specific rule, the process behind it, and what happens after it. Anyway, that's the simple version without making it weird and tangled. If you've ever heard of the term and wondered what people were talking about, now you've got the bones of it. And we'll do more of these next time because there's always some policy phrase floating around that sounds more mysterious than it really is. And that is stuff you need to think about.